So excited to kick off another incredible episode. And I have two amazing guests this week. Katy Milkman is the James G. Dinan Professor at the Wharton School and the host of Charles Schwab's Choiceology podcast and co-directs the Behavior Change for Good initiative. And Sophia Pink is also with us, a PhD student at the Wharton School. She studies decision making and behavior change. Welcome, Katy and Sophia.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Okay, so let's dig in. Y'all have some new research you've been working on. I can't wait to learn about it and hear what's you've learned and more importantly, what we need to take action on. So fill us in. What's the new research about and what are some of the key findings?
So there's lots of work over many decades in many countries showing that on average, women are less likely to choose to enter competitions than men. And this isn't inherently a bad thing, right? It might be the right decision to not enter a competition. But in some contexts, particularly contexts like choosing whether or not to apply for a job, choosing whether or not to put yourself up for promotion, these are really consequential decisions. And if women opt out of competitions, this can put them at a disadvantage, especially in contexts like for leadership roles, where in order to access a leadership role, to become a CEO or any kind of enter any kind of top position, you usually have to have chosen to enter many competitions to get there. So we were wondering, okay, what can we do to make a difference in this situation? And so we were wondering, well, what if we just told women when they're making the decision of what jobs to apply for? What if we just told women that women on average are less likely to apply for competitions, like applying for jobs, than equally qualified men? Like, what would that do? Now, classic psychology research might suggest that that would be a terrible idea. Because if you tell women, people like you don't compete, we know people conform to social norms, so that might make women refrain from competing. Or there's also research on something called stereotype threat, which shows that in some contexts, if you remind people, like women, of a marginalized identity, it can make them feel anxious or worry about their identity or worry that they're going to do badly. So a lot of work would say you should never, would suggest you should never tell women that they're not gonna, they have a propensity to not compete right before they're making a decision. But we thought maybe that's missing out on something. Maybe that doesn't tell the full story. And we actually thought that telling women this information could encourage them to apply for even more jobs. And the reason for this is because of something called stereotype reactance. Now, reactance is something in psychology, it's a phenomenon in psychology where when someone tells you, don't do this, it makes you kind of want to do it. So, for example, if you see a big red button and there's someone who says, or a big sign that says, don't press the red button, suddenly you kind of want to press the red button. So that's reactance. So we thought maybe telling women, uh, you know, women tend not to compete as much as men, even if they're equally qualified, can make women think, hey, like, I don't want to be making decisions about what I do just because of my gender, and could make them apply to more jobs. So that was the idea. And what we did is we ran a field experiment on a job application site for executive and board roles. So this is a site where to access a site, you had to be essentially at the top of the labor market. So you had to be eligible to get an executive role, to get a board role, a VP level role, one of these top level jobs. And what's interesting is on this site, we saw that even among people who were already at the top, we still saw this gender gap in job applications. So equally qualified women were still less likely to apply to jobs than men, even at this like really, really top of the labor market subgroup. So what we did is we ran an experiment where women on the site, we randomized a half of them to see a message that said what I told you before, that said, hey, did you know that women are less likely to apply for jobs than equally qualified men? Don't let men get all the advantage, apply for any jobs you find interesting. The other half of women were just told, applying for jobs is good, it has benefits, apply for jobs you find interesting. And then we looked at how many jobs did women apply to on the day they saw this message. And what we found is that women who saw this reactance-inducing message where they learned about this gender competition gap applied to about 20% more jobs on the day they saw the banner. So it led to this big and meaningful boost in job applications from women. So overall, we think that this idea of reactance, particularly stereotype reactance, is a positive tool for closing the gender gap and for behavior change in general.
That's so cool. That's so cool. And Katie, I know you've been doing this work for a long time. What were your reactions to that research finding?
Thank you for asking. I also wanted to say it was wonderful to work with Sophie on this project. She was an amazing leader on this work. I think this is really exciting, and I was really excited to see the result because we know increasingly what we can do if we have a situation where an organization is willing to change the way, say, that it hires, or change the way that it promotes to help make sure that underrepresented groups and women aren't held back. But you don't always necessarily find yourself in a situation where that's a priority for an organization, and creating insights that could potentially be leveraged by third parties, like a search website, or creating insights that maybe even could be leveraged by nonprofits who work in regular communication with, say, women and underrepresented minorities, just to help give them the right message so that they might be motivated to take actions, I think is really exciting. This is really different than saying something like, oh, maybe your promotion structure should be changed. It gives us another lever that we can push, and a lever that more people can push that might help accelerate the closure of some of the gaps that exist due to confidence barriers. Not due to competence barriers, right? These women, historically in research studies, who are less likely to compete are just as qualified as men, but due to lack of confidence or anxiety about risk taking, maybe won't choose to apply even when they could be outstanding. And that's really hurting everyone. So I'm really excited about this work. I think it's fantastic to have more science-based insights we can use, and that more different types of organizations can use in order to help accelerate progress and equity.
Yeah. Yeah, because why wouldn't you want the best people applying for your jobs? And if there are systemic interventions we can make, like the reminder messages, for example, that's one thing, but it's also, I think what you're getting at is kind of a both and. Sometimes in DEI work, we talk about individuals actions and we talk about systemic actions, but this is kind of a both and. It's a systemic change, but it's also it operates at an individual level for an individual that's choosing to apply for the jobs to change their behavior. And hopefully those reminders can improve the pool of talent for everyone. I'm curious when you think about this research and what organizations could do differently based on this research, what would be your recommendations to organizations that want to ensure this competition gap rather isn't, prohibiting them from finding the best talent?
Yeah, so I mean, one direct implication from our research would be for organizations to identify the points where there's a choice of whether or not to enter a competition. For example, identify the point where you're inviting people to apply for promotion or not, or apply for a new job or not, or nominate themselves for an award, situations like that, and give people this prompt at that moment they're making a decision. Because we have evidence that just reminding women of this gender competition gap right at the moment where they're about to make that choice can induce reactance and therefore help close the gap. So that's the main implication. There's other really cool research that shows other things organizations can do. I think Joyce, he and Sonia Kang have some other research that shows that defaulting people into entering competitions, so defaulting people into promotion, making kind of people are automatically applied for promotion or are submitted to be eligible for promotion and they have to opt out, can also reduce the gender gap.
Yeah, I love that default position. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so this is research. I think were they at University of Toronto
Yes,
when
I think
they
it was,
ran it.
and there, I think there's additional. co-authors as
Yeah, I
well.
know. I
Nico
know.
Lassatera,
Yeah.
whose name I may be butchering.
Hopefully we can add to the link. I want to make sure everyone
Yeah,
Well, we'll
gets
be sure to
credit.
yeah.
give credit
Um,
where credit is due. I know I always am remarkable awe of people that can remember all of the researchers to a given study. So, but
Joyce was
I
the
love
one who does
yeah,
this.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I think
Um,
it's okay to just name her at the moment.
but
yeah.
but yeah, they found they were addressing like a similar issue, right? Women are less likely to enter competitions, like applying for jobs, like applying for promotions. We were taking the Our work was more like Katie was saying, let's say you're not in an organization, you're kind of a third party actor, like a job website, and you can't change organizational policies. What can you do? So we provide our work provides a reactance inducing message. But if you're inside an organization, you can actually make policy changes, make structural changes. What they found is that if you basically make the choice of whether to enter a competition or not kind of less influential by just automatically kind of entering everybody into a competition, then that also closes the gender gap because there's less of a women don't necessarily have to clearly like make the choice of like, do I want to apply for this? Do I not? The default is well, just everybody's submitted for this promotion, and that closes the gap too.
And, just thinking about this default position to put folks into, I'm thinking about my own corporate experience and the women that I coach that are like, there's this hesitance where we know that men, based on your research, just are less likely to experience that hesitance. But I remember just feeling like the boldness of my male colleagues, especially early on in my career, like, well, we should be promoted after a year. And it's like, what? Like, I would never like think that was the default, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so taking away kind of that extra barrier and making it the default, I think is really interesting. Do you all have, whether you have research or just thoughts on where does this problem stem from? Is it, from early on the messages girls get about competition, or where does it start?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the real answer is we don't really know exactly. There is some evidence that it's cultural. It's not like a biological phenomenon. There's some work, again, I can give you the citations afterwards, that suggests that it arises like not among like really little kids, but more when people are older and kind of like learning more cultural norms. There's also a little bit of work that shows in more kind of matriarchal societies, we don't see this gap as much. So I think we don't know exactly where it comes from, but we think that it's something cultural, something about social norms, cultural norms, that about kind of expected behavior for women and expected behavior for men.
And it also is related to confidence.
Yeah.
So if women are have their confidence boosted,
Yeah.
that can reduce this gap. So we have differences, and this has been known for a long time that there are gender differences in the degree to which people are confident about their abilities, even
Yeah.
for a fixed ability level. So if Sophia and a male graduate student down the hall both performed the same way on a test, they would come out of that test with different levels of confidence about their competence. And so that is a big part of what drives these differences, is different perceptions of the same information. But yeah, there's also women are punished for not conforming to societal stereotypes, meaning we like them less if they take different actions. If a woman maybe puts her name in the hat, she may be treated differently when she's a first year. That may be seen as less socially acceptable than if a man does the same thing with exactly the same competence. So there's a whole host of things. Women also are a little bit less likely to take risks in general, less risk loving than men, in part due to overconfidence. But there's a lot of wonderful research that's started teasing these things apart. And I wanted to mention that Muriel Niederle at Stanford and Lise Vesterland, who's a professor at University of Pittsburgh, are the two people who originally identified this gap in competition and women's willingness to compete, and have decomposed some of the elements, along with lots of other excellent researchers.
Yeah, it reminds me, Reshma Sanjani, I know, has a book, Brave Not Perfect, and how we socialize gender for girls to be perfect rather than brave and take risks. And so, of course, this leads to different behaviors when they enter the workplace, that when it's more male dominated and that male gender expression has been normed more for competition and for taking risks, women can feel that kind of that socialization that's gotten them there isn't going to get them to the next spot in the corporate world. And so just curious on where that comes from. I know I have an 11-year-old and just seeing her hesitant sometimes, especially when I'm with her at school around other children, I can see her hesitating or questioning herself where typically not all genders are all the same, right? But you don't see that same hesitance of her male counterparts at school. So it's just interesting these messages we get as kids kind of manifest and then can't be so helpful in the workplace. So I'm
Now,
curious.
I also have to interrupt and say, as a parent of a male, sometimes it's also that the girls mature faster to thinking about social norms than the
Yeah,
boys just behave. But I think you're
yeah,
right. By the time they're fully grown, the social messages they've gotten are certainly contributing. But my perception is that like 9 to 11 year
yeah,
old,
they're growing up
well,
more.
the boys are uninhibited, and the women have started thinking. They've
Yeah,
matured enough to start thinking about
maybe
it's a
I don't
socially
know
acceptable.
this.
The
Yeah,
boys just
maybe.
haven't thought of that at all yet.
Yes,
Anyway,
yes,
that's
that's
my
a really good point.
non-clinical assessment with, yeah, based on life experience rather than data.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's a little bit of both, as you know, lived experience
Right,
and
as
data.
everything is.
Yeah, yeah.
Good researchers. Yeah, and so I'm thinking about organizations that, I think a lot of companies when we share research like this are talking about like, oh, that doesn't happen here, right? Like we don't have that problem here. It's happening somewhere else. What would you tell an organization that thinks that this isn't happening? What might be like a reason for them to care or to try some of these interventions?
Yeah, so evidence, so there's lots of evidence that this is a really robust finding that we see all over the place. There's, hundreds of studies that show that on average, women are less likely to enter competitions than men. Doesn't mean every single woman is less likely to compete than every single man, like, but it just, on average. And I would say that even if you don't inherently care about like gender equality or anything, if you're an organization, you want the best talent. And if some people who are highly qualified are choosing to not apply, you never see their resume, you never see anything about them, you're missing out on talent. So I think if organizations want the best talent, then this is good for them.
Which I'm wondering, you mentioned a couple like key intervention steps, the reminder process, reminding people about the competition gap before they enter a competition, the default mode, kind of entering people into the promotion pool rather than having them self-select. What may be some other ways to kind of systemically or practice interventions that could mitigate this risk?
Let's see, what other? My
Yeah,
favorite one is the defaults one, but you
yeah,
can
Yeah, that's good.
I
I don't see that happen very often.
yeah, no, defaults are great. I think giving more feedback so that people
mm,
are more aware of their competencies and
yeah.
giving more encouragement can be another way. If you're thinking about what are the mechanisms and how can I combat
Mhm.
these mechanisms, then if we know confidence is a barrier, we might want to boost the confidence more aggressively and recognize that could be a risk for women,
Mhm.
and give them added encouragement that they should make sure they put their name in the hat. So defaults are great because they're a form of encouragement. Essentially, they're sort of like this is happening unless you don't
Right.
Mhm.
permit it to. So that makes it hard for people to omit themselves from the competition. They think, oh, okay, this is the norm. Everyone is competing, so I don't have to make an active choice to opt in. But there are other ways you can make it feel like the
Yeah,
norm to compete. Everybody's doing it. Tell people that,
yeah,
like 90, we expect 90% of people to
exactly.
enter who have this many years of experience to enter their name in the hat for a promotion at this stage in their career so that it really doesn't feel like I am doing something counter normative or counter stereotypical
Yeah.
by applying. So I would just think about, what's driving it. If it's a lack of
Mhm.
confidence, if it's a perception that this isn't the normal thing for a woman at my stage to do, how can we disconfirm those beliefs?
Yeah, yeah. There's another, yeah, related to what Katie was saying, um, some other work that shows that this is particularly a problem when things like qualifications are really vague.
Mm.
Because when the qualification for a job is like leadership experience, like there's so many ways to interpret it. And so someone who's less confident could say like, well, I don't have leadership experience. Someone who is more confident confidence, that you could say like I do, and this really like this vagueness can exacerbate the gender gap. So there's some work that shows if you make job requirements or promotion requirements more concrete, there's less of this room for differences in confidence
Yeah.
to wiggle in. So making things more concrete can
Yep.
also help reduce the gap.
It reminds me too of the work on gender bias. Like we know if we make objective criteria, for example, on qualifications and on how people are evaluated for promotion and hiring decisions, that we level the playing field more often too, and kind of mitigate that bias by just having very clear objective criteria. And qualifications usually, yeah, I think about that as like a laundry list of like a wish list that we'd want in the candidate versus what we're actually going to hire for. And so it leaves all sorts of room for subjectivity and bias, and just, unfairly filtering out really qualified candidates. Um, it also reminds me a little bit of one of your colleagues that I followed. A lot of our listeners follow Adam Grant that does work on scaffolding. So like with hidden potential in his book, like the scaffolding that you provide around people that support. So understanding if there is a confidence issue, like how can I boost it? How can I kind of provide that support so that people feel supported and encouraged to do their best work and to take chances.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I think that's
Is there,
consistent.
and having done this research for quite some time, Katie, I'm curious if this is going to lead to other research projects or if it reminds like where the evolution of this is happening. Because like you said, this competition thing, this gap isn't necessarily a surprise, but it's how does it inform how we ultimately resolve this problem? Because I feel like we've been talking about this issue for as long as I've been doing the work, 20 years in my corporate career. What do you think it'll take for things to ultimately shift?
Oh gosh, that's a great question.
You had a magic wand.
Yeah, I am certainly not optimistic that we can just magically change our culture in a way that girls and boys will grow up with the same expectations, face the same consequences for the same actions throughout their lives on a reasonable timescale. And assuming that I'm correct and that we're not going to shift our culture dramatically in our lifetimes, or we may shift it dramatically, but maybe not so dramatically to eliminate any differences in the way we socialize people from different genders, then I think the answer is that we have to raise awareness about these issues and actually develop science-based tools that help combat them. There's a lot of research suggesting sort of just-in-time interventions are particularly useful rather than you mentioned Adam Grant. He and I were co-authors on a project led by Edward Chang of Harvard Business School, where we looked at what was the benefit of something a lot of organizations do, which is diversity training. We found that diversity training had pretty limited benefits along the lines of what we hoped that it would have. It maybe changes attitudes a little, but behaviors very little. The main behavior changes we saw were it seemed to scare women and minorities into seeking out more mentorship, as opposed to leading leaders of organizations to be more inclusive. So that was demotivating in a sense that it suggests the solution is not just these sort of long-term efforts to educate, but rather we need to build in systems to organizations to make them more equitable that don't require people to think differently, like defaulting people into applying for promotions automatically. The other thing, though, is that Edward had done some follow-up work showing that if you insert a short reminder about the importance of diversity into people's lives right before they hire, then that actually does make a difference in hiring decisions. So it's very just in time. And I think this project, which Sophia led, which actually Edward was a co-author on too, so there's a theme in bringing Edward up in these conversations. So this project also is very just in time. It's right at the moment when someone's deciding about whether or not to apply. You flash this message up in front of them, and it changes the way they think about that day's decision. It doesn't seem to change them permanently. So if we look downstream, it's not like weeks later they've revolutionized their behavior, but it's in the moment when someone's making a choice. How can we nudge them? How can we restructure choices in order to help facilitate closure of these kinds of gaps. So that's the way I'm thinking about it. Like, I don't think we can change the culture instantly. That seems really hard. Let's talk to sociologists and cultural psychologists, not us, about how to do that. And that's a really long-term goal. And in the meantime, the more science we can do to figure out what are these just-in-time solutions or adjustments to organizational processes that do seem to make a big difference, then we can employ as many of those remedies as possible to create as much of an equal playing field as possible.
I love that. I love that so much. Yeah. It's the systemic pieces, the just-in-time pieces that really resonate. And I think too, I mean, I think about my career at times when I've questioned myself or not put myself in a competition. And it often took like one ally or one mentor kind of putting up the mirror and being like, Julie, I've seen you do A, B, and C. Like, why not X? And it was usually a male leader, but it often was just that person just gently reminding me in the moment when I was questioning myself to take a chance. And it's a big deal. So I think for listeners, being that ally for somebody else, seeing something in somebody that maybe they don't see yet in themselves, and identifying that and proactively recognizing that, especially if it is critical to a decision they might be making about taking a risk or entering a competition.
And I think what Sophia's work shows is that it's not just to remind them, hey, this is a good moment, Julie, I'm your mentor, but
Yeah,
also, hey, Julie, not only is this a good moment, but also Joe down the hall, he's going to do it.
yeah,
Don't let gender stereotypes hold you back.
right.
So we're giving some extra ammunition to that excellent ally to
Mm.
use to frame that conversation so they can be maximally influential. Not only might you want to nudge Julie, hey, here's a just timely reminder, but you may want to frame it around how if she doesn't, she is, yeah,
Somebody
she's
else is going to get it. Yeah.
yeah, and men tend to apply for this. Don't let her gender hold her back.
Yeah. Yeah. Why not you? Yeah. And I think sometimes a coaching phrase I use a lot with people that are hesitating on opportunities that they're clearly ready for. It's like, what's the worst that could happen? Like, you don't get the call, you don't get the interview. Like, that doesn't sound like a bad thing that's going to happen. It's not like you're going to get in trouble for applying to too many jobs. It's often we kind of build it up in our head more so because of these biases, because of these stereotypes. Awesome research, Katie, Sophia. I am so thankful for your work. Tell our listeners, we'll be sure to link to the full research study in our show notes, in our Forbes piece. But I'd love to know, like, how can they continue to follow your work, or what are some additional resources you might recommend?
Yeah, we try to post new papers on social media, on LinkedIn, on our websites. Kitty also has a podcast where she shares new research.
Awesome.
We, yeah, try to get it out there. I don't
Yeah,
know what other resources
probably our websites are
Yeah,
great. Is yours sophiapink.com?
correct. Yeah.
Okay, so and mine is katymilkman.com. And I have a newsletter called Milkman Delivers, which is another way to find me. Choiceology, the podcast, and I wrote a book, but it's not really on this topic, but it might be of interest.
It's related.
It's called How to Change, and it's mostly focused on achieving goals, but some of it can be applied to these topics
And
as
what
well.
is the name of the book, Katie?
It's called How to Change, the science of getting from where you are to where you want to be.
I love that. I love that. Oh, good. Well, good self-promotion and action right here with all of these
That's
amazing.
right. And women
Yeah,
self-promote
great.
less than
Yeah.
men. So we're doing it. Thanks for nudging us in a timely manner to self-promote.
Well, and you're not alone. I mean, academic researchers rarely self-promote these things. So just by way of being on the podcast and sharing this amazing knowledge and resources, I'm just super thankful for your work and keep showing up now more than ever. We need your voices. So thank you for this important work.
Thank you so much for having
Yeah,
us.
thanks for having us.